So I was born and raised in Hong Kong to parents who are expats. I then went on to the UK when I was 13, and then I went on to university in the US where I studied Egyptology. I had always been interested in archaeology and old objects and history, yeah, that's, I guess, where I started becoming interested in art and eventually working in the art industry.
And I remember you mentioned after your BA in the US, you also went to the UK for your master's. Is that correct?
Right, yes. I did work a few years before going on to do my MPhil in modern and contemporary Chinese art.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, so right after graduation, did you enter the art industry right away, or what kind of lines of work did you explore before doing your master's?
Yes, I did. So the summer before my final year at university, I joined Sotheby's in New York as a summer intern. And that was really, the first taste I had in the art world and the auction industry. And I really loved the environment. We did do our share of, cutting and pasting. This was, back in the day, pre-digital. So I loved the experience. I liked the sort of combination of, art and research with the more practical, the business and the market. So yeah, after my experience there, I really, that's kind of what I knew I wanted to go into.
Right.
I would have loved to have stayed in New York after graduating, but at the time, Hong Kong, the office here, and the art world was really starting to take off. So actually, the Sotheby's office, suggested that I apply to work in Hong Kong instead. So, my parents were here, so, and with the art world, being so exciting at the time, so I joined as a graduate trainee, which is a one-year program, and 6 months into the program I was offered a position in the Chinese Works of Art department.
Okay.
And that's, when I really got started and got interested in Chinese art and history. As I mentioned, I had studied Egyptology, and my focus is more, the Near East, Middle East, ancient Egypt, where I learned hieroglyphics, Mesopotamia, and I think I had taken just one class on Chinese art. So working at Sotheby's was really learning so much on the job. There's one thing learning from textbooks, but another thing, being able to handle the objects,
of course.
Which was so exciting for me. I think it was during that time I decided that I wanted to pursue further study in Chinese art. And that's why, as I mentioned, I later went to do my MPhil.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk a bit about your kind of master's experience and what you learned from there?
Sure. As I mentioned, I worked, let's say, 5 years before doing my master's. So to be honest, it was quite an adjustment to be a student again. Very, very different environment, as you know, writing essays and taking exams. But I think I had more of appreciation of being a student, and I totally loved the experience. And being in Oxford, of course, was quite a special experience. Yeah, having access to the Ashmolean, they have such a good collection of modern and contemporary ink paintings, which is the area I specialized in. I remember taking tutorials, at the museum with my supervisor, Sheila Vanker, who's the curator of Chinese art at the museum.
And would you say probably around that time is where your interest, not only in Chinese art in general and history, but where your interest in ink and contemporary ink begin?
Actually, I can pinpoint the exact moment when I got interested in contemporary ink. It was during my time at Sotheby's, actually.
Okay.
And we had sold we were working on a special sale of scholars' rocks and objects from a very important Taiwanese collection. And one of the rocks was accompanied by a pair of paintings by Liu Dan. For those who may not know, he's one of the most revered living artist living in China at the moment. And I was just so taken in by his paintings. They were so beautiful and so elegant. The rock that he had painted was, about this so high or so, and he, transformed the piece into something that was like over a meter in height. Mm-hmm. And I just love the way that he had taken, this very old, storied object and, he, reinterpreted it into a contemporary way and made you look at the rock differently as well. So I think from that point on, apart from being like obsessed with rocks, very nerdy obsession of mine. And then I decided that I wanted to learn more about ink. That's where I wound up actually writing my master's dissertation in contemporary ink paintings, contemporary ink painters of rocks. Yeah, that's kind of how it all started.
Right. Yeah. And you've continued to do a lot of research, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Olivia is very active within our art industry, wearing multiple hats and doing a lot of different things. So perhaps for some people who might not really understand kind of these roles and titles that you do, for example, as a curator or consultant or writer, but being an independent one, you do have a lot of flexibility mm-hmm. in terms of the projects that you work on. Could you just share a little bit about your roles and what you do for each?
Right. I guess you could say I'm sort of like a Jill of all trades within the contemporary ink world. As you mentioned, I do consulting work. So I work with collectors and aspiring collectors mm-hmm. To help them with their purchases, or if they want to sell works. And I do curatorial work, so I've worked with galleries in putting together group exhibitions and solo shows for artists. Most recently, I guess we'll speak about this later, I've been curating shows for the Ink Society in Hong Kong. Right. I'm a freelance art writer, so I write about artists, interviews with artists and profiles for galleries, as well as arts publications. Right. Some of the recent pieces I've written, I did a piece on a Japanese artist, Morita Shoyu. Okay. He's one of the most important post-war Japanese artists and working in calligraphy. And I did a piece on Chinese artist Zheng Chongbin. I guess you could say that I do have different roles, but they are all related, and what ties them together is that they're obviously all promoting contemporary ink in some way.
How about, I guess, any artists that stand out in your mind? Because you do a lot of interviews. I know you worked with some artists as well for your film, which we will talk about very shortly.
Sure. That's what's so great about working in contemporary art is getting to know the artists and working alongside them and learning so much from them. As I mentioned, Chongbin was one of the artists I've written about recently. Yes. And he's one of my favorite. If you guys may not be familiar, he's a San Francisco-based Chinese artist who's really at the forefront of contemporary ink, in that he's bringing together contemporary traditional ink painting with Western abstraction, and I think what he's doing is really unique. And of course, some Hong Kong artists that I've written about or worked with, Wai Bongyu and Hong Fai. I'm very big fan of both their works and some of their collaborative series that they've been working on recently. I wrote a short piece for their show, their joint show. I think this was a few years ago now.
But more recently, you made your directorial debut with a documentary, which is called The Unsung Heroes of Ink, which is a film focusing on the role and the significance of paper, especially in ink art. How did you come up with this idea for this project?
I think this film really came about as a culmination of my research in this area. So it was really like I guess over the years of researching ink painting and getting to know the artists, one of the things that I learned was that papers, tools and materials are so important to an artist. Many artists spend time choosing the right papers, like testing different papers made of different materials before finding the perfect one. Some even commission their papers to specific paper makers. So this very kind of subtle alchemy between the artist, the paper, and the brush. And for me, I'm not, I have learned calligraphy before, but I'm not a painter by any means. But I played cello quite seriously up until throughout university, and I think I kind of liken it to that subtle relationship between musician and the instrument and the bow.
Right.
So it's very important. But what I felt was that few people really understand this importance. That goes for myself included. There's so much focus on the artists and their artworks, which in many ways is a very good thing.
Yes.
But the role of paper and the crafts people who make it is often overlooked. It hasn't really been explored. So I wanted to change that and to shine a light on the role of paper.
So I understand obviously this was a very new experience for you. You mentioned you weren't really didn't know too much about films or filmmaking in general, and originally this this research was you were thinking about writing a paper about it, but it's kind of transformed into this beautiful documentary. Explain that process a little bit. How much time did you actually start from beginning to end, the roles that you played, the people you worked with?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as you said, I've never been much of a film person, so making a film certainly was something that never had crossed my mind.
Right.
So this was a challenge in at least a few ways. I had to hire a crew, and this took quite some time. I think I interviewed 8 cameramen before finding the right
Perfect one.
Yeah, Vincent Du, who was my cameraman, he was great, and we had a really good rapport. But most importantly, I think he really understood the vision that I wanted for the film. I was not only hiring a crew, but to supervise a crew. For someone who had never made a film before, they all had more experience than I did. So I felt that was a very big source of anxiety for me. And also doing it all in Chinese. I do speak Mandarin, but I was educated in English speaking environment, and Chinese is not my mother tongue. So turning up in the middle of Anhui, as an outsider, I think I was also quite anxious about that. It was great experience. I did spend, I did visit Jingxian in Anhui for a few times over a couple of years.
Do site visits.
Right. To research and to get to know the paper making masters before we filmed, obviously. Liu Dan and Xiao Fan are the painters that I featured in the documentary. I wanted to show this, relationship between artists and the materials, and I picked those 2 artists. Liu Dan was especially a very big inspiration in this project, just because he takes his materials and papers so seriously, and he himself commissions his papers with this papermaking master in Anhui, who is also featured in the documentary. Xiao Fan, I mean, he's trained more as an oil painter and sculptor, so he approaches his ink painting practice quite a different way. And I wanted to show this kind of contrast.
Between the 2.
Right. Yeah, I mean, himself, I think he approaches it more as an oil painter.
Right.
So he's constantly sort of wielding his brush to adapt to the kind of canvas or the paper that he uses.
When you approached with the paper makers with the interest to kind of tell their story and show their craftsmanship, what was their response?
For myself, it was so inspiring to get to know some of the paper making masters. I think so many of us, as we know, China has developed so quickly, and you know, old crafts and traditions are not something that we normally associate with modern China. So you know, to meet these guys, these papermaking masters, take so much pride in their work was very inspiring and really quite moving for me. One of the papermaking masters we featured, Cheng Yang, his well, he's maybe not a master yet, he's an apprentice. Yeah. But his grandfather started the papermaking mill in the 80s, and himself, like, he could have, you know, gone to Shanghai or could have worked in the big city, like many young people do, but he decided he wanted to join his family business, and at the age of 18 he joined his father, and he's been working there since, and he will probably eventually take over from his father in the running of the mill. So yeah, to see that, to see him speak so you know, with so much pride, I think I also wanted to touch upon this in the film.
Because it's really such an intricate process that I didn't know until I was able to watch the film, and when we were preparing for this interview here. But so many things to consider, whether it just be the plants, the trees, in terms of the artist talking about only purchasing certain paper from certain seasons. You need to be quite in the know and really understand the paper, the material, in order to pick the right one for you to use for your artwork.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is a long, protracted process. So it takes, you know, basically a year from, you know, the trees are cut down until, you know, the paper is complete. So it takes time, and it, you know, depends on the weather conditions as well. It's definitely a very laborious process of making these handmade papers. And for me to see this, you know, with my own eyes, I think it gave me, you know, a deeper appreciation for ink painting. And this is kind of what I wanted to show to my friends, and to artists, and to, you know, a wider audience.
What would you say was probably your most memorable experience throughout this entire project?
I think every aspect was, you know, because it was so new to me to make a film. I think I do appreciate every aspect. I mean, filming, I think I mentioned to you, you know, because the trees are cut down during winter. That's the only time when they're cut down and harvested for paper production. So we filmed during the Christmas holidays, and yeah, it was so cold. It was typical, like, southern China winter, so there's no heat indoors. I think I was wearing, like, all the clothes I had in my suitcase in one go, including, you know, those, like, sticky heat pads.
Everywhere, to stay warm.
Right. So physically, you know, that was that side of it. And of course, in the evenings, it was very much Chinese hospitality with the paper makers. So we were kind of forced to drink, you know, shots of baijiu, which is, the most potent liquor. Like, smells like rubbing alcohol. Like, one paper maker in particular, he's very he likes to drink a lot. I mean, lucky as a girl, I think I was spared. But anyway, I think
the rest of your crew, definitely.
Right. We had to get up the next day quite early because most of the factory work happens, you know, quite early in the morning. So,
and because I know that you were pretty much involved every step of the way. So from, developing an idea for the film, in terms of fundraising, to hire the crew and everything, you pretty much went through the entire process with a very small team. What do you think you learned most from this entire experience?
Right. Yes, I mean, I had to raise funds for this project. Also, I mean, being a first-time filmmaker, I was quite anxious about that too. You know, like, who would, you know, fund me really, for having, you know, never produced a film before. But I have to say, I was very encouraged by the support I had from the Ink Society and UOB, who are my two main sponsors. You know, they believed in me and supported me from the very beginning. And I also had a group of private collectors who supported me financially as well. Yeah, it was really from beginning to end that I had to direct the whole process. I mean, I really enjoyed it, and I do hope I maybe can make another film someday.
I know you mentioned before one of the more touching elements when you were creating this documentary was really understanding this concept of tradition and passing on tradition from one generation to another, which you definitely felt when you're speaking with the apprentices who are carrying out their father's or grandfather's business. We learn in the documentary that this art of papermaking is kind of slowly disappearing, in the sense that there are not too many factories who are devoted to this craft. What are your thoughts about this, or how do you see this perhaps affecting the ecology of ink art moving forward?
Right. I mean, that's right. There are only a handful of factories in this region that I was focusing on in Anhui province that are making the handmade papers. I mean, there are a lot of other factories in the area, but they are making machine-made papers, so not quite the same high quality, and also they don't have that kind of longevity as a traditionally made sheet of xuan paper. But I have to say these factories making the handmade papers, they're actually doing quite well, and they are quite profitable. There is a demand, and with more professional artists looking for good papers to use for their paintings and calligraphy, and also people who take painting and calligraphy as a serious hobby. I think there's also demand from them. I really believe that as long as there is a demand for this, these factories will continue. I was seeing this in Jingxian when I was there, and I think it will continue.
Through this film, and also a lot of other projects that you do in general, you've continued to be a very strong advocate for ink and sharing your love of ink with other people. You mentioned before you're also representative of Ink Society, which is an organization here in Hong Kong that fosters to broaden the understanding and appreciation of ink. What role have you kind of taken on, whether yourself or Ink Society as well, to create more awareness for everyone related to this topic?
Right. So the Ink Society, our biggest outreach event is held during Ink Asia. So that's when we put on an exhibition and also present a series of education programs. And I think, in this way, we really try to promote ink. It's kind of a way to reach a wider audience. So in the past few years, we've been working on a series, what we call the tribute exhibitions, which I've curated for the Ink Society. And this is a way to celebrate, an artist and their legacy, usually a master artist, but through a more personal lens. So what we do is invite each collector or lender to write a short statement about the artist or the piece that they have collected. And this, we publish in the catalog and display it next to the piece during the exhibition. We find this very meaningful, and we found that audiences really engage with the art in kind of a different way when they read about the reflections from the collectors. And this isn't something that museums or galleries are usually able to do. That has been very interesting, and last year we had a show, a tribute to Irene Cho. For anyone who is not familiar, she's one of the most original and innovative artist of the last century. We had her exhibition. I think there was a lot, it was kind of a celebration year for Irene last year, with the very impressive retrospective at the Asia Society, and then the selection from the MK Lau collection at Duddles. So it was great to be part of that. We invited her son to come all the way from Australia, and he participated in a panel discussion to share more thoughts about his mother Irene as a mother, not so much an artist. So yeah, that was great.
For a more broader question, which we're asked, or Henrietta has also asked as well, which is what can we do in terms of, what more can we do in terms of promoting ink? I remember you mentioned the first screening of your film took place in Switzerland, which is obviously more predominant Western audience. Did that experience shine any light for you in terms of how we can, I guess, how ink can be more international and more widely accepted?
So our premiere was at the Asia Society on online webcast. You know, we've all had to adapt during these times. But I was so encouraged. We had a really good turnout of attendees on Zoom, and a lot of questions afterwards. And I think there's great interest, definitely. And I think we can all be, you know, all of us working in the ink world can be encouraged by that. I think it's a matter of finding the right connection points from artists to audience. Nowadays, artists are working and drawing from so many different traditions, not just their own, and different disciplines. The kind of cultural boundaries are blurring, and you know, the world is becoming smaller. So they're drawing from, you know, different avenues to inspire their art. And just to go back to Liu Dan, he was traditionally trained in painting and calligraphy, but he has a very deep interest in Renaissance drawings from the 15th and 16th centuries. So, for example, at his solo show that he had in the UK at the Ashmolean a couple of years ago, you know, one of the paintings was this beautiful ink on paper abstract landscape, but it had been created in response to a drawing by Raphael. He had said that it's not so much the subject matter that he was interested in, but more you know, the ambiance and the, you know, Raphael's sort of frame of mind when he created it. So to engage in that way to an audience who, you know, may not have been that familiar with Chinese ink or culture, I think that's really great. Exciting things are happening, as you know, in the international space. I know a couple of years ago, there's the LACMA Museum in LA received a huge gift from a collector couple from Europe of over 400 works, the majority of which are contemporary ink paintings. And the museum will be holding a series of exhibitions on the collection in the years to come. I think all these things are great, and yeah, we need to continue going in that direction. And closer to home as well with the upcoming M+ Museum.
Right. Yes, of course.
Which will feature ink very prominently. And I think, yeah, what's interesting about M+ actually is that they're taking quite a different approach, a more transcultural approach in their curating. So even looking at the recent ink show that Leslie Ma had curated, and it wasn't presenting only, like, you know, the East Asian artists that we're more familiar with, but introduced like an artist from India, America, Lebanon, to engage in kind of a different sort of dialogue. These are all great. I mean, I think they will encourage more dialogue and maybe, you know, some debate as well. But yeah, I think if we continue going in this direction, yeah, it would all, you know, help to reach a wider audience.